Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here to talk about the new Pixar film Inside Out 2. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. The original Inside Out movie, which came out way back in 2015, likely makes the shortlist for, I think, a lot of people's favorite film from Pixar. I believe that is probably my number one favorite Pixar film. And kind of that inventive tale did seem to showcase the animation studio really at the top of its game. Unfortunately, as time has gone on, it also kind of marked a high point that has seldom been reached since that film came out. I think especially like a recent string of just mediocre to just downright bad films like Luca or Turning Red, Lightyear, Elemental have led many people, myself included, to wonder if Pixar has perhaps finally lost just some of that golden touch. And oftentimes kind of a sequel, especially a sequel to a film that came out many years ago, does reek a little bit of just sort of studio desperation trying to right the ship. But perhaps revisiting one of the most beloved stories in the Pixar canon may be exactly what the doctor ordered, because this film is awesome. I really, really enjoyed this film. This, to me, is a triumphant return to form and probably Pixar's best film in years. And the original Inside Out movie resonated with a lot of viewers, not only as a very fun and vibrant story, but also by offering a rich and kind of enlightening framework for us to explore our own kind of inner emotionality. And Inside Out 2 takes a very similarly insightful approach, but keeps things interesting by exploring like a later stage in young Riley's development. Because when a flashing red light announces that puberty has finally arrived, kind of the personified emotions of the first film, like joy and sadness, disgust, anger, are unexpectedly greeted by same newcomers such as anxiety, embarrassment, and envy. And suddenly Riley's head becomes a very turbulent, kind of chaotic place as she struggles to just navigate the confusing experiences of being a teenager. I think if the original film kind of explored learning how to navigate just our base level emotions, this sequel is a lot more about kind of how we mature and formulate our own beliefs, which ultimately kind of comprise our own sense of self. And if all that sounds a little bit more like a Psychology 101 college class, more than a work of entertainment aimed at families, you can also take heart that this film is just a total delight that is brimming with just a ton of effective humor as well as amusing world building. And while some of the themes and specific circumstances in the film may aim at a slightly older demographic, given that Riley, the central character in the film, is now a teenager and herself dealing with more mature struggles, I'm grateful that the movie never kind of leaves the younger viewers behind. For example, I took my own kind of two 9-year-old twin boys to this film, and they both loved it, even if they were sometimes kind of laughing at and resonating with different moments in the film than I was as an adult. Because while many younger viewers may not be able to relate to the specifics of the need to start wearing deodorant or just the whiplash of hormonal mood swings, they can relate and understand Riley's more universal struggles, such as just having loyalty to her friends and developing a healthy self-esteem. And overall, the concept of personified emotions may not be as novel as it was back in 2015 when we'd never really seen anything like that, but the filmmakers do keep things fresh by expanding, doing the world building in very fun and interesting ways. For example, the characters at one point float down, the stream of consciousness, which is filled with sort of any items that relates to what's on Riley's mind at the time, or they come confronted with sarcasm, which is a big gaping pit, which kind of amusingly puts a sarcastic tone to any of the dialogue of these characters, or they get caught in a brainstorm where light bulbs start pelting them like rain. So while the concept itself may not necessarily be all that original now, the world building itself does remain sort of as clever and playful as ever. And like I said earlier, I myself am a parent of two 9-year-old boys, and I think for many parents, kind of the relationship with Pixar over the last several years has been tested not just because what seems to be like a drop in overall storytelling quality, but also because of the studio's tendency to kind of sometimes emphasize or explore unwanted themes and messages. But thankfully, Inside Out 2 is clean, it is a wholesome film, and it does feel like a refreshing change of pace from kind of the ideological minefield that so much of children's entertainment these days has increasingly become. And what I appreciate too is that there are several opportunities in the film where they very easily could have traveled down some of those undesirable roads, yet the film does restrain itself. For example, for a movie that is largely about like developing a sense of self and identity, kind of given the cultural context of today, it's perhaps surprising that like, the role of sexuality is not given like a very prime importance. And even a movie that features a cast predominantly, at least of the humans, of like teenage girls all together going through puberty. Some parents may sort of be holding their breath for just the inevitable kind of same-sex subtext and relationships to be developed, but the film just never goes there. It does, like, there's a moment where the emotions go past Mount Crushmore, which features sort of represents all the juvenile boy crushes that Riley has had over the years, either real boys or like fictional from video games. But kind of as a 13-year-old girl, her sexuality is just never emphasized as being like a real central defining component of who she is. And instead, the film kind of repeatedly leans deeper into the more like fundamental values of and kind of her convictions, like that she's a good person or that she's a good friend. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, really there's not a whole lot going on. So language, there's no like direct profanities, although there are several uses of like words like heck or oh my goodness. There's also a scene where a character, Joy, unleashes sort of this nonsensical string of words, which kind of functions as a profane tirade, although none of the actual words themselves are problematic. As far as violence, nothing going on here other than perhaps that Riley is a hockey player, and hey, hockey is a violent sport, but nothing to be concerned about as a parent. And kind of lastly, sexuality. Like I said, really nothing going on here. There is sort of a scene in which where Riley enters the hockey locker room, and you do see some of the other teenage girls that are wearing like very modest like sports bras, but again nothing concerning for that. And as I mentioned earlier, much of this film does take place at like an girls hockey camp, and I did not personally notice any kind of suggestions or allusions to like a romantic relationship or even inclination between any of these female players. And perhaps there's some that I missed that some of you guys will pick up on, but I do think that any of those allusions would likely not be anything that a young viewer would discern. As far as themes, kind of things going on beneath the surface of this film, like I said, Inside Out 2 does focus kind of on the formation of our beliefs and on our values. The film itself doesn't expand its commentary to touch on or include any like religious or spiritual matters, but it does showcase how our fundamental beliefs do take root in like the deepest part of ourself, and kind of how pivotal a role that those beliefs do ultimately play in kind of who we understand ourselves to be. Because in the movie, the personified emotions that are living in Riley's head kind of take her most important memories and experiences and kind of go down a very deep elevator shaft right down to like the core of who she is, and plant those memories, those experiences, kind of allowing them to take root and almost like grow up like these vines, reaching up into her sense of who she is. And it becomes a very, I think, powerful visual just about how our sense of self is not merely like just the product of abstract ideas or just head knowledge, but is shaped by our memories and our experiences at a much deeper heart level. And kind of the verse in the Bible that came to mind in Proverbs 4:23, where it says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows out of that. And I think this film is a very timely reminder that as we relate to people, or even as we attempt to have conversations, meaningful conversations about faith and belief, that we are dealing with just a collection of deeply rooted influences that often go much deeper than we can see with our eyes. I think another theme too, which is true of both Inside Out 2 and the original, is just that people are complex and life is very messy and confusing and can be difficult. And kind of because of that, we should all strive to offer each other more grace and patience rather than frustration or judgment, because actions have consequences, and self-control is necessary. And Inside Out 2 does touch on that. There are consequences to her emotional kind of lashing out, or the way that some of these emotions lead her to be a jerk to her friends. But I think the movie does remind us that as Christians we should be slow to just assign very like nefarious motivations for these actions, or just assign very hasty assessments of characters, because there is so much going on that we don't often see. And I think one of the most like effective mechanisms for the film to highlight that truth is there are several kind of scenes where, as the audience, you're like taken out of Riley's head and kind of go into like the minds of her friends or her mom or her dad, and kind of seeing how their own emotions are navigating the same kind of similar circumstances, and just reminding us that we all have a lot of factors and things going on beneath the surface. And kind of the Bible verse, Ephesians 4:2, the Bible urges us, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. And this film doesn't go into the spiritual, but I do think as Christians, that is definitely something that we can affirm. So in the end, I love this movie. I think this is a delightful film, a worthy continuation of a beloved story and beloved characters. I think it's fun, it's wholesome, it's thematically rich. And I think it's just an example of kind of the power of a well-told story when it explores very universal human experiences. And just a reminder, I think, that life is messy, that people are complex. Because in fact, even while like typing up my review for this movie, one of my kids dashed by my home office, in tears, due to some trivial argument, misunderstanding he had with his brother. And kind of, instead of responding in annoyance, I found myself just thinking of this film, and just that there's a lot going on in his mind. And I think that is the power of these Inside Out movies. Yes, they're colorful, yes, they're entertaining, but I think on a deeper level they also provide a lens to help us just understand ourselves and our world more clearly. But hey, I would love to hear what you guys think. If you see this movie, if it lived up to your expectations, if you, like me, enjoyed it as sort of a return to form of some of the classic Pixar, jump into the comment section. Let's have a conversation about this. And if you haven't done so too, encourage you guys, subscribe to our channel, become a collider. Lots of movie reviews and a podcast and interviews and just other fun stuff. We'd love to have you be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide through World for Christ.